Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, and the radio show is Everything Co-op, as you just heard. This morning, we have the pleasure of talking about and speaking about the legacy of Allan Gallant. Allan was in Baltimore, and he will be inducted in October to the Cooperative Hall of Fame. He passed on July the 24th, 2021, so we have his son, Samuel Gallant, here with us this morning. Good morning, Samuel.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Hi. Glad to have you, sir. And Stuart Reid, who worked with Allan, particularly on the Food Co-op Initiative. Good morning, Stuart.
Good morning, Vernon and Samuel.
Thank you for being here. Samuel, being the son, how would you characterize your dad? I mean, what are some kinds of things that he taught you as a boy?
Well, thank you, Vernon and Stuart, for having me on, and thank you, Stuart, for nominating Allan for this incredible honor. And thanks for spending this time talking about him and what he accomplished and did through his career. I mean, he was gracious. He would thank you all as well for this opportunity to talk about it. He taught that to me for sure. He also, throughout his career and his life, definitely, I guess he taught me to always be friends, lead with kindness. Even if there's hard things ahead, it can always be done with compassion and kindness. And he was, even though he was kind of a large fellow and could be a bit, bombastic, he was still in all very kind in his work and his life.
Great. And did you see that in working with him, Stuart?
Oh, absolutely. Allan was one of the most supportive board members I have ever worked with, and always recognizing the effort that myself and other staff put in and complimenting us for our work, and just remembering that those words made a big difference. And while we knew that other people felt the same way, he said it. He was out there and attaboy. I mean, I don't know how many times I heard him say attaboy, Stuart. And I still recall that fondly.
To follow up a little bit, also just thinking about him a little bit more, he was a teacher, he was a mentor, not just to me, obviously, but to countless people that he came across in his career, including Stuart, the list is very long. Sandy Rosenbluth, Arnold Montgomery, people that he worked with, but also kind of taught as well along the way. Actually, that's how he and my mother met, as he was teaching economics and accounting class, and she was taking the class, and that's how they met as well. Okay. So he was also very much a teacher in his life.
Stuart, did he teach you?
Oh, absolutely. It always look at all the sides of the issue. Don't take anything for granted. It isn't always the popular belief system that's in place that's going to be what's most effective for you. I mean, he was the conscience of the board in some ways, but he was always, regardless of where he landed on an issue, he was always fully behind us. We all, I think, learned a lot from what he could contribute.
Okay, so in order to be a teacher, you've got to have some skills. I taught in my career 12 years. So let's talk about those skills. Samuel, what kind of education did your father have? Formal.
He went to City College in Baltimore, which was a high school. Graduated, I don't know when, but he graduated from Pennsylvania, the Wharton School, in 55. He always would sing the song whenever he had the chance, which was Pennsylvania's Push and Drive comes from the class of 55. And actually it was comes from the men of 55 originally, because there weren't any women in that class and at Wharton, but they changed it. And speaking of that sort of like inequality, that was a big driving force for him was equality and equity and bringing people up and giving them the resources, educating them. He became a CPA and soon thereafter. He was also a student of this school of life. He always did things. He was always busy. He always, made himself available to people that he was mentoring as well. And the people that he worked with at the various organizations and co-ops. After college, he worked for the family business, which was a food wholesale company in the Mid-Atlantic, a large one called Be Green. His father worked there. His mother was a Green, and he was working there up until the Martin Luther King riots. And when those riots happened,
before you go,
go ahead.
Before you go to MLK, I want to go to this B. Green and Company. So his father and his mother worked in B. Green, and that's where they met, I understand.
Well, I'm not sure if Sarah Green and Lou Gallant met at B. Green or not, but they both ended up working for the family business.
Okay. So when I talk about education, it looks like he got the education of the food business from the company with his father and mother working there. And after he graduated, he ended up working there. Is that right?
Yes. And he, and I'm sorry to keep sort of jumping forward to the, I guess while working there, and prior to the MLK riots and then post those riots, it really became clear, he started noticing the lack of minority ownership in the food industry in the grocery stores. And that really was his sort of inspiration, his origin story, his impetus for everything he did really after that, to make sure that was his calling. He really devoted himself to providing economic opportunity for low income and minority groups and ownership as well, facilitating ownership of those grocery stores.
So the reason I went back to B. Green and his father and mother working there and then he working there, so you get this formal education in the classroom of textbooks, but he had the informal education, which I think that sometimes is much better because it gets in your bones of how the business works. I would imagine around the dinner table, his parents may have talked about the business as he was a kid and growing up. So he knew the business. He knew the business of business and how you interact with people and so forth inside of business. Would you think that might be correct?
Absolutely. Allan, when he was there, was doing, I believe, mostly logistics, in delivering and things like that. His father was a salesman and traveled, actually, had a territory into Virginia from Baltimore. And his mother kept the books for this massive company. And that was I think, the blending of his worlds and his philosophies was, his mother was very much, an accountant. She was not trained as an accountant, but she ran the books tight, and she taught him all kinds of things about numbers and P&Ls and cost of goods and all these different things, the accounting terms that I don't know. He instilled some of them in me, but she kind of beat those into him. And then his father, my grandfather, was very much a people person. and loved sales and loved people and creating relationships and making friends. And so those were sort of the two worlds that combined to make him who he was, because he wasn't just a charismatic teacher. He was also very good with numbers and really enjoyed breaking down P&Ls and balance sheets and looking at it with a critical eye. And he liked to call it forensic accounting as well. And, he got a little creative sometimes.
Okay. Stuart, how did you see in working with him this knowledge and his training of both people, being a people person, and the numbers, whether it's forensic accounting or...
I'm glad he didn't turn the forensic eye on me too often when he, with our board reviewing financials. I guess we have pretty clean ones compared to a large company. But he kept an eye on stuff and definitely thought a lot about, particularly of the funding side of our organization, and there's opportunities out there that we needed. And one of the things he kept coming back to, and this is part of the people person as well, I think, is we've got a bunch of different organizations supporting food co-ops, and you know what? There's economies that could happen if we worked together a bit more closely or did things a little differently. And he wrote up little opinion papers and kept us thinking about, is there a better way to do this that could help more people and do it more cost effectively. So yeah, he was always on top of that.
Okay. So I got a teacher who's a mentor. He's a people person. He knows the numbers and he loves the numbers. He's a CPA, and that's hard to find. And quite frankly, it reminds me of Chuck Snyder. He was a numbers person in the accounting financial side, and it turned out that I knew him as a people person. So they seemed like they had a lot in common. And Chuck was one of the reasons for this program being in existence, was wanting more and more people, particularly in low-income communities, to know about co-ops. So you started, I cut you off, Sam. I want to go back to your father being influenced by the Martin Luther King riots of the 60s. So tell me about your knowledge about him being influenced by that.
Well, that was, after the riots, he essentially immediately left the Be Green. And from what I understand, he connected with an organization in D.C., the National Council for Business Opportunity, which they were a socially conscious group of people that were trying to promote minority ownership of grocery stores and other essential businesses. And, that inequity and inequality that became so evident with the riots definitely was, it stayed with him. It's also something, he taught to his, I'm not his only child. He has 3.5 others, and a stepdaughter. Okay. But he always was quick to see, problems.
This is WOL News Talk 1450 AM and 95.9 FM 959.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, and the program is Everything Cooperative. And we have Sam Gallant with us today and Stuart Reid. Before the break, Sam was talking about his father and his father being influenced by the Martin Luther King riots, and then going down to D.C. and joining the National Council for Equal Business Opportunities to help minorities and blacks get into food businesses and other opportunities to overcome the issues of the past that Martin Luther King was fighting for. So, Sam, that's what you were talking about. Can you tell us, where did that lead him once he got, so he's a white male out of Baltimore in the food business with a CPA, and he's working for the family business, and it seems like that would have been the rest of his life because his mom and dad had worked in that business. It's a good business. It's a big business. He's got the formal education. He's got the informal education. He knows the business probably from inside out. He told us he was doing the logistics. And all of a sudden this thing happens and it changes his world. He leaves that business and go out.
Well, he started, I know that this is a co-op show, but what Allan did was really sort of a blending of cooperatives and sort of putting co-ops and community development together. I mean, they aren't apples and oranges, or they might be apples and oranges, but they're still fruits. So you can compare the two. And they definitely go hand in hand. They both go in a fruit salad very well together. And he actually started working with the Ford Foundation as well as Sandy Rosenbluth and Arnold Montgomery with the founding of LISC, Local Initiative Support Corporation, ending up working with CDC's Community Development Corporations mostly in rural areas to start. He was working in Mississippi, a youngish Jewish accountant with big, thick Coke bottle glasses. If anybody knows him, met him in person, he had the worst vision. Going down and working with CDCs in the Mississippi Delta in the post-King riot era, era, and really trying to take that that Bobby Kennedy and Ford Foundation sort of, it's just the social and economic justice movement and the civil rights movement and apply it in a very real world way that can be, tangibly seen, whether it's, building grocery stores in underserved communities and not just building them, but having them be built and owned by the people in the community as well.
Stuart, do you have any sense of when Allan got in the knowledge of co-ops? Because I would assume it wasn't taught at Wharton, because it wasn't taught at Stanford in my MBA program, and it isn't taught a lot now in business schools. And
very few places. From what I understand, I think it came largely with his work in Alaska, working with the Alaskan distribution networks that he set up as a cooperative system to serve the remote villages there. Now, that was a huge project, and from everything I've heard, very successful. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of it, but I've heard him talk about it, and that work, the results of that work are continuing, I think, to this day.
To follow up on that, Stuart and Vernon, actually, so his first real foray into the world of co-ops was actually a part of a training that he did with the CC Grains co-op in Seattle that actually led to the formation of Nutrisource, which in itself was a pretty innovative idea as well. It was a co-op of co-ops of various co-ops, including PCC, which is the Puget Consumer Cooperative, as well as the CC Grains in Seattle and a number of others in Oregon and Washington State. I was born in Seattle in the late 70s, and then one of the ways that he got into Alaska and how that led to Alaska was, Seattle was Alaska's the capital of Alaska, is how they used to joke, that, Seattle was really sort of the connection to Alaska and the rest of the United States. Was one of the things that he did with Nutrisource was he brought in private equity partners, which was sort of I guess, from what I understand at the time, rather
difficult,
a different way of doing things with co-ops, and that was Nutrisource was a huge success, and again, the private capital that was brought into Nutrisource had a connection to the Alaska Commercial Company, and then they brought him in to consult up there, and then we moved up there and hired him. They hired him to run the Alaska Commercial Company, which was a series of maybe about 5 or 6 rural Alaska bush is what they call it, the bush of Alaska stores. And they were and still are actually some of the last places in the United States where you can barter, where, people would come in and trade furs and ivory and gold for gasoline, ammunition, and milk and bread. And he grew that network of stores to maybe at 20 some stores in villages from, Bethel to Barrow to Ninilchik to, all the way out onto the Aleutian Islands. And Stuart was touching on some of those things that he did up there, which was helping to conceive electric co-ops in rural Alaska, fishing co-ops, as well as he really sort of helped revolutionize the shipping of things up there. Frontier Expeditors was the name of the company that sort of blossomed out of that, was a shipping company to get these goods and services out into these goods out to the bush communities in Alaska.
You know your father's history, boy. He would be proud of you.
Well, I actually did I learned to, when I was a baby, we were already going up to Alaska when we were still living in Seattle, but my mother likes to joke that I learned to walk on in a little Cessna airplane in Alaska, and so I was there as a child, and then all the way up through about age 9 when he was done with AC, let's say, and the AC company, and we moved back to Baltimore.
That work he did in Alaska came back into a play recently. Lori Chapu, who works in co-op development in North Dakota, has been doing a lot of research on distribution options for the remote communities of the upper Midwest and Plains states. And Allan happily consulted with her on how they'd put together a network that could serve some of the most remote communities in Alaska. And they were talking I think months before he passed away. Still working on that project.
And obviously he knew more about this than I do. I'm only secondhand, and I love that he was still, mentoring up until the end. And from what I understand, maybe Stuart, you can expand on it, but how they sort of revolutionized the distribution in that part of in Alaska, in that state, was called bypass mail, that they would essentially backhaul goods on mostly empty mail planes that were going out to the bush communities anyways, and it was government subsidized because it was the U.S. mail. I shouldn't talk too much about that.
The incremental cost to add that freight was minimal, and it helped everybody. And they're looking at the same kind of possibility of using postal capacity, excess capacity for distribution in other places. So.
Fascinating.
And that, I know we're coming up on a break, but that innovation was really drove Allan. He was, the term is used a lot. He liked to think outside the box, but he really did. He loved to think about things critically in a different way, try to look at it from a different perspective. And that was a way that he lived his life. He loved solving problems.
So we have a man here that his parents worked in a food distribution company. He worked there. He went and got an undergrad degree, came back and worked there. Martin Luther King riots changed his world. He saw the inequities of life. And then he started putting that training into work and to help low-income communities. We'll be right back and talk more about where he went to and what he did. Please don't touch that dial.
WOL, where information is power.
Welcome back to Co-op, and we're talking today about Allan Gallant and his legacy. This program is brought to you by the National Cooperative Bank. NCB's mission is to support and be an advocate for America's cooperatives and their members, especially in low-income communities, by providing innovative financial and related services. So when we started on the break, we were talking about Allan Gallant's innovative thinking, his thinking outside of the box. And so, Stuart, I would like to ask you about this Blooming Piers warehouse that went into a foundation. What was that like? What was that about in his career?
Well, Blooming Prairie Warehouse was one of the last remaining successful cooperatively owned warehouses among the food co-op community. And a lot of them had sold their assets off to larger corporations or folded because they failed. And while Blooming Prairie was well run and Allan was on the board there representing the co-op members, they started having the discussion of what their future was. And he, among others, said, the writing is on the wall. We're not going to be able to survive in this industry at the size we are with the economies of scale that are required. And we have a choice. We can run it dry, keep going as long as we can, or take advantage of the assets we have, sell the company now to United Natural Foods, and then the owners will get some equity back out of that. So that was controversial for sure, but they did decide to make that choice. And when the Blooming Prairie Warehouse was sold, influx of equity to all of the member co-ops was such that it fueled a lot of growth. They were able to do expansion projects, store improvements. It was a bit of a windfall of that equity. And in addition, they had the foresight to suggest that they set up a foundation, which became the Blooming Prairie Foundation. And the mission of that was to continue to support organic food production and distribution throughout the co-op network. And years later, as Food Co-op Initiative was approaching a milestone, and we were still Food Co-op 500, we hadn't incorporated yet as a nonprofit. We were trying to figure out how we were going to fund this to go forward, if we were going to survive at all. And Allan shocked everyone, I think, by coming up with a proposal that the Blooming Prairie Foundation could support us if we were to incorporate as a nonprofit, become a formal organization, and over a 5-year period, support us with $200,000 a year, $1 million worth of funding. And he had the voice, respect of the community, the people that made that decision, and that was what ensured that our organization had legs under it to get going and stay going as effectively as we have. And so he's, along with Chuck Snyder, I think Allan had as much to do with the ability of our organization to not just exist, but to grow and survive. And it was a huge contribution.
So, Samuel, did you know about this part of your father's history? Were you at the dinner table talking to him, or tell us your view of this?
Oh, yeah. And speaking of that, like back in the day before cell phones and email, being a young person, once we moved back to Baltimore, I got to know everybody that he mentored and worked with, including Jesse Singerman, you, Stuart, and Charlie Ryle from Shorebank, so many people that would call the house phone, and I would answer and say hello, and so I got to know everybody who called in that way a little bit.
I'm sorry. Can I stop you? Are you telling me that this is a businessman that would get calls at home from other business people? I mean, I thought business people left their work at business. He took it home?
I mean, he worked out of the house, yeah. And he did all of this, by the way, out of the goodness of his heart. There was very little, he didn't get rich in the world of co-ops. Let's just say that. So he just did this because it was his passion. And Blooming Prairie was definitely, the Blooming Prairie Foundation and FCI, the Food Co-op Initiative, were definitely the passion that he had later in life. Without those things, actually, it's possible he wouldn't have lived as long as he did. You always have to have, that passion, especially as you get older. And he loved traveling to Milwaukee, Madison. Madison is where the meetings were, and I actually regret I never got to accompany him. But back as he was getting older in the latter years prior to COVID, he couldn't travel as well on his own, and also he doesn't see well anyways in the first place. He would take various family members. Actually, Stuart, you've probably met my daughter, who accompanied him.
Maya?
Yep, Maya, to a couple of the meetings, and that sort of goes back also to his mentorship. He also took another one of his grandchildren and his daughter, my sister Lisa, to various meetings as his sort of chaperone, but also to nurture this mentality and this idea and these philosophies of cooperatives and community development. And the next generation of cooperatives, we can sort of talk more macro here, Vernon and Stuart, I feel like is not as sort of well-rounded. It's very much more specified and specialized into various, segments and compartmentalized to this is what I'm, an expert in. Whereas Allan was definitely sort of a generalist. He had, he would love to talk about, food and co-ops and CDCs were definitely his passion, but he could also, he was actually involved in creating an ESOP at a resort in West Virginia called Cool Font, so he was very much a consultant kind of mentality. He loved to problem solve again and help people. But yes, specifically the Blooming Prairie Foundation and the and FCI were something he was very, very proud of and loved to talk about and share with people. Actually, I've definitely looked at FCI's balance sheet before because he always would like to say, hey, come here, look at this. He loved to share. He loved to always teach and share. And so, yes, that was something he was immensely proud of in the latter years.
So, Allan, for our guests, tell us what the FCI, the Food Co-op Initiative, is. What is this thing?
Food Co-op Initiative?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, happy to talk about that. We started up as a pilot project 2005, I believe, that was intended to help new food co-ops specifically, get off to a better start. There wasn't a strong support system or any real guidance available aside from a book that had been done some time before that needed some updating. But anyway, there wasn't a training system in place. There wasn't a lot of resources available. So the idea was that we would provide some mentoring through volunteer networks of people that had experience in food co-ops, and that we would provide some, to begin with, they had some money set aside for seed grants that would help a startup group fund their early organizing efforts, and it was required a match from the communities, so it forced them to start engaging the community and doing outreach at the very start. And that grew into the nonprofit organization we are now, Food Co-op Initiative, and we're working at any given time with over 80 startup groups around the country.
Wow.
And we have a whole library now of resources. We do regular live webinars and conferences and have a world of support. And other organizations are also stepped up to help provide startup support. So we're not in it alone, but we're the only organization that provides free support and concentrates on startup-specific development.
So out of this, how many co-ops, food co-ops particularly, but other co-ops do you think that Allan Gallant helped us start?
Well, it'd be hard to say. Yeah.
That's why I said think.
Yeah, even his direct impact on the co-ops and Food Co-op Initiative was probably somewhat limited because he wasn't providing the technical assistance, but he was providing the support for the organization as a board member, as a funding promoter, and all of the other things that contributed. So if you assume that it wouldn't have happened without him, it's easily over 100 startup food co-ops that have benefited. More than that altogether, but just to throw a number out there. And then who knows how many more co-ops, Alaskan and others that I might not even know about. So a lot.
What do you think, Sam?
And that's I think it's, the reason it's incalculable. You could probably, count the ones that he was directly involved in, but the reason you can't really calculate it is because of his time spent teaching. He really, taught a lot of people, whether it was even just as a consultant, he would come in and consult and sort of just brought in as a mentor to people. And that's sort of direct, but also indirect. But if you have, a classroom full of people that you're teaching some nonprofit accounting to, you don't know where those people go off and do with the rest of their career necessarily always. So I think as an educator and an inspiration, he had touched a lot of people and a lot of really excellent programs that if maybe some are still around in this country.
We've talked about food co-ops, and I want to put it in context of there's 4 major sectors or sections of co-ops in the U.S. or in the world, and it depends on who owns and controls the business. So if the business is owned and controlled by the employees, it's called a worker co-op. If it's owned and controlled by the people that uses the products or services, it's called a consumer co-op. And a food co-op, and you can tell me if I'm right, Stuart, or not, but a food co-op has normally been a consumer co-op where the people that shop in the store own the business. And there are some that are worker co-ops. There's one in outside of D.C. called Glut. It used to be in D.C. It's a worker co-op. The people that work there own it. And then I talked to one person in Seattle that it was a hybrid. It was both a worker co-op and a consumer co-op that both owned the business. And then a lot of farmers will use the other 2 type. One is called a marketing co-op or producer co-op that's interchangeable. Cabot Creamery is one, Ocean Spray is another. They're businesses where the farmers will bring their products and that company will create and produce other things, to take the milk and make cheese or yogurt or whatever. And the other one that farmers use a lot is a purchasing co-op. Farmers would come together and then they would buy things that they need, fertilizers, seed, tractors, whatever they might need, and to produce whatever they're going to produce. I'm finding that artists are beginning to use the producer co-op. There's one in Pittsburgh, and I spoke to one and did shopping at one in Zuni Pueblo in New Mexico of Native Americans, where the artists get together and create a storefront. They couldn't do it individually, but they could pool their resources. And in the one in Zuni, they do their creativity in the back of the storefront. So they have a place and they buy the goods. So it's a combination of purchasing co-op and a consumer co-op. So Allan was mainly in the food co-op world, but in this whole distribution, I would say not only was he in the consumer world, but he was probably in the other different worlds. I want to make that, and I want to come back and talk about that. But before I do, I like to talk about values and principles, because we've already talked about Allan's value, people person. Okay, people person. Also, numbers. And the values of co-ops, I like the ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. Or I like to think of caring for one another, whether the golden rule piece of it. So when we get back, we're going to talk about the different sectors, the values, and about the ecosystem and the future. We'll be right back.
1450 WOL, where information is power.
Welcome back, everybody. Information is power, and that's why we have this program to give you the information about co-ops so that you may go out and start one with your friends or colleagues, or you go shop at one, like in a food co-op, to help them. Take this information. Stuart, if they wanted to get a hold to food cooperative initiatives because they want to start a co-op, how would they do that? How would they get the information?
Sure. The easiest way is to go straight to our website, which is simply FCI, the initials of Food Co-op Initiative, fci.coop. And there's contact information there. We've got a resource library with all kinds of information about how to get started and what the development process looks like. You can sign up for our live webinar series, all kinds of amazing amount of material there. And we do encourage people to take advantage of the Contact Us link and that'll reach out to me. Most of the time, I'll be the one who will take care of first contacts and talk about what we can do for them and their specific projects. But one of us for sure will get back and help people get started.
So when we talk about Allan Gallant being a people person, and he got inspired, he changed his whole world with the Martin Luther King riots after to go out and help lower income communities. Do you think, Samuel, that these values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others would be one of the reasons he latched on to co-ops?
Oh, 100%. I think that's yeah, I mean, going back to the sort of epiphany of the MLK riots for him being that sort of launching point for all of those values and more. He was, passionate. He was passionate about everything he did, and whether that was also, starting a synagogue, which he has done before as well, and being integral in making, building things from the ground up. He loved to build, both in his work, but also in his life. He loved, tinkering and building things. He did know which end of the hammer to use, even though he couldn't see very well. He still had a little bit of that sort of building spirit in life, in all aspects of his life, and building community and building things for, to be better. In the next generation, and he definitely lived his life with the golden rule, and he treated others with the utmost respect, even when things were hard. Like, I think we started the hour saying, sometimes, the closing of the Berkeley Co-op was, that was a hard thing to do, but it was also, done with the utmost sort of respect for everyone involved. And he was idealistic, but he was also realistic, and he really sort of lived his life by that mantra, the idealism, and that goes back to the sort of the two sides of the coin of, the people person and the accountant. You can be idealistic and be friends with everyone, but you also have to be very much realistic at the same time.
Very much.
The numbers have to add up.
So on the program, when we first got started 9 Octobers ago, we had a guy on a program called Papa Sin from Senegal, and he worked for NCBA CLUSA. He did a lot of things, but he said co-ops were created to solve community problems. If there was no community problem, there was no need for a co-op. So you mentioned a couple times, Sam, that community development, and that's what, to me, co-ops are all about. And when we start talking about food deserts, they're the community problem. And it's how do you get the community together to develop the community so that the community can solve the problem by creating a food co-op. Stuart, do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. We're working increasingly with co-op startups in what food apartheid areas, food deserts, whatever term people prefer, but and in Black-led groups often as well. So we're learning a lot by getting in our feet into this, and I'd say we're learning more than we're teaching right now. But there's a huge demand, and this was always a challenge. I mean, Allan acknowledged that when we first started putting resources toward increasing our effectiveness in the area. He said it's going to be really hard. We've tried doing development work before, and it hasn't always worked. So we have to look at it a different approach, and if we're going to make it work, and that's what we've tried to do. But his experience working in the field was a big guiding voice to our board in deciding how we were going to approach this.
So I want to come back and talk about some of those issues, but Sam, you go ahead and say whatever you're going to say, because I think you're going to answer my question.
I don't know. Actually, I was thinking about all kinds of things, but he was a philanthropist, and little money he had, he gave it away, and he encouraged philanthropic, attitude. And actually, he grew up knowing the Weinbergs, the Harry and Jeanette Weinbergs. He was friends with their son growing up. And, I think that knowing them also and seeing the amount of money that they around to good things was important in his sort of development of those ideals of really trying to help people and have people help themselves as well. And he was, he was trying to do it in different ways and innovative ways. And money, again, coming back to the accountant part of him, was part of that. He had different ideas about how to fund different programs. And I think that was the thing he loved the most about the Blooming Prairie Foundation, was being able to just give that money away and say, yes, you need this money, you do this thing, you have a great idea, go with it.
Yeah, you answered it. Now, co-ops are people first, planet second. And it sounds like that was your dad, Sam, was people first. Then the social responsibility, environmental is the number one decision maker. I was taught profit was the first three things for capitalistic models. Stuart, did you see this people first planet in Allan? Did you see that materialize? Is that how you saw him? And is that what cooperative initiative?
Well, as a need a co-op, that want a co-op to be able to do it effectively. And that's the only reason we exist, is to help communities that need that service do it well, and hopefully be a successful addition to their community that helps solve problems, makes the community stronger. So that was why he was such a strong supporter of what we did, because it matched his values.
Well, thank you all for tuning in to Everything Co-op, hosted by Vernon Oakes. You've been listening to Sam Gallant, son of Allan Gallant, who will be inducted into the Co-op Hall of Fame October 6th at the CDF event, and Stuart Reid, Executive Director of Food Co-operative Initiative. Thanks for listening, and as Vernon always says, work cooperatively. See you next week.